And Sarwar, why should Scots vote for Labour in any forthcoming general election?
Look, I think this year we have a huge opportunity to deliver the change that people in Scotland are so desperate for. An overwhelming majority that want to get rid of this rotten UK Tory government. And the only way of getting rid of this rotten Tory government and to maximise Scotland's influence in an incoming UK Labour government is to elect Scottish Labour MPs here. And that's why we'll be going out there making the positive case about how your vote can, yes, get rid of the Tories, yes, maximise your influence in terms of Scotland's influence in a UK Labour government, but how it actually materially changes people's lives here in Scotland as well. And that'll be a positive case we'll be taking to the doorsteps in the run-up to the next general election.
So as your popularity, it does seem that it's not because of what you're offering, it's because of who you're not. You're not the Tories, you're not the SNP in Scotland. Therefore, the cycle has changed and it's your turn now, not because you've delivered anything or promising anything.
Well, I think it's a combination of factors. I think you're right to say that people in Scotland and people across the UK have decided they want the Tories to lose. And I think more and more people in Scotland are deciding that they want the SNP to lose. But I think where Labour still has work to do is to persuade people why we deserve to win.
And why do you deserve to win?
And I take that head on because we have to make, yes, a values argument. Yes, we have to make the argument about how we can get rid of this Tory government, but we have to demonstrate what difference it makes if Labour wins. And
so that's been said. That has been said often. So yes, what difference will you make?
And I'll give you a few examples. One is the New Deal for working people, the most transformative change in workers' rights in a generation, which means ending the use of exploitative zero-hour contracts, ending the scandal of fire and rehire, giving people employment rights on day one, and ensuring that we have a real living wage so we make work pay. That's one example. Another example is how we bring fairness back in our tax system. So we would abolish the non-dom tax status where the super rich get away with not paying their fair share of tax, and we would use that money to invest in our public services. That means more money for Scotland's NHS if the SNP choose to put the money there, and we would suggest that every penny in those consequentials should go to Scotland's NHS.
Okay, well that's...
No, I'm happy to, I'll give you a third one. I can keep going if you like. I'll give you a third one. I'll give you a third one, which is how do we have GB Energy, a publicly owned energy generation company that's a key part of our wider green prosperity plan that delivers the transition we need to see here in Scotland so we can bring down people's bills, create more jobs, deliver energy security and have climate leadership. Okay, GB Energy headquartered right here in Scotland, backed up by the power of the UK
policies
Treasury.
You're promising just now.
Big policies and big changes that would mean for
and how can we be convinced they're going to happen? Because Labour under Sir Keir Starmer promised a lot of things before he stood on a platform along with Jeremy Corbyn promising things that he stepped back on, and I'll list these to you. He promised that we've just heard about the retreat on the £28 billion Green Prosperity Pledge. He won't be capping bankers' bonuses. That was promised. He won't be changing corporation tax. He'll keep it the way the Conservatives have it. He will not be delaying the axing of the House of Lords, and no longer pursuing a pledge to bring organisations like rail, mail and energy into the public ownership. These are promises made only 4 years ago. They're not there anymore, so why should we believe these ones?
Well, firstly, there's a mix there in terms of what's reserve policy and what's devolved policy, but I won't get into the details of that unless, of course, you want us to. But on the specific point here is I would much rather we went into an election campaign being straight about what we're promising and only promising what we can deliver, rather than making big promises that when it hits the cold light of reality we are then rowing back from. I would much rather we take that pain now in opposition rather than use that promise to get someone's support and then row back from that promise.
So you're just going to continue with Conservative policies?
No, not at all. I think that would break down the trust that we've seen break, not just because of the Tories across the UK, but also because of the SNP here in Scotland. And I've already set out before, when you stopped me at 3, I could have kept going in terms of some of the practical differences between a Labour government and the Conservative government. But my point to you is that your promises were made before that weren't followed through. Why can we believe that these will be followed through? So I think it's perfectly right for us to do two things. One is to road test to destruction our policies in opposition, so they're ready to be delivered and people can trust that they can be delivered and will be delivered if Labour has the good fortune to win. But also I think we've also got to be clear about the reality we find ourselves in. When we made that commitment almost 2 years ago, or over 2 years ago, sorry, around the Green Prosperity Plan and that figure that has been quoted, international borrowing rates were around 0.1, 0.2% in terms of interest rates. They're now over 4%. We have had the Tories crash our economy. We've had the Liz Truss mini-budget that's seen mortgages skyrocket across the country. The average family in Scotland paying more than £2,000 a year more in their mortgage. And so therefore we have got to be cognizant of our fiscal rules. We've got to recognise the economic situation that we'll inherit. It may well even get worse because of the carnage that's being presided over by this Conservative Party.
So you're Tory light. That's what some people accuse you of then, because you're just continuing that.
Look, I think people will make their own minds up. I think everybody in Scotland can see that there is a world of a difference between a Labour government and a Tory government. Actually, ask Ian Blackford. It was his words himself that there's a world of a difference between a Labour government and a Tory government.
What you're offering in a lot of cases is different from what UK Labour is offering. You disagree with Keir Starmer yourself. You know, you oppose the two-child limit and benefits. He isn't changing that. He's sticking with that.
Well,
where does that leave you?
Well, I think a couple of things. One is it demonstrates devolution in action, where you can suggest Scottish solutions to Scottish problems and take distinct positions. I think that demonstrates the strength of devolution. And the SNP...
But it's a fundamental principle. You said it exacerbates poverty.
But the SNP can't have it both ways.
The UK government isn't going to change that under Keir Starmer.
Well, let me come to the specifics in a second, because I think it's really important about our anti-poverty strategy. But the SNP can't have it both ways. They can't say it's weakness if Scottish Labour agrees with UK Labour and then say it's also weakness when Scottish Labour disagrees with UK Labour. We take a principal position based on what we think is right.
What do the Scottish people know they're going to get?
And in terms of the...
Are they going to get Keir Starmer or are they going to get you?
Well, what they're going to get is a Keir Starmer UK Labour government, I hope, if the people choose to vote that way. I'm not going to be presumptuous like the First Minister has been in terms of already saying that the election result is decided and somehow saying that Scottish people don't matter and Scottish votes don't matter. Every single voter, every single family, every single constituency in Scotland matters, and Scotland will matter at the heart of a UK Labour government. But let me get to the substance of the point, because it's really important, is we all agree that we have to change our universal credit system. We all agree we need a reform of universal credit, both here in Scotland and across the UK. We have to create the financial conditions that allow us to make universal credit more generous and work in the interest of people so we can reduce poverty. But welfare is only one part of fighting poverty. Another way to fight poverty is making work pay, and that's why the New Deal for working people is so significant.
This question over Sir Keir Starmer, what does he stand for and does he flip and flop? Today's big story, of course, the former Labour candidate in the Rochdale by-election, support, all the way through, and then all of a sudden, no, we don't support him anymore. And it exemplifies what people accuse Sir Keir Starmer of. You don't know what he stands for. He moves with the wind.
Well, look, I think the biggest losers out of this entire situation is actually the people of Rochdale, because they lost a phenomenal public servant in Tony Lloyd, and they deserve a phenomenal public servant to replace him. And sadly, the situation we found ourselves in is that we have a Labour candidate that rightly has had his support withdrawn, and you have two former Labour MPs, both in my view disgraced for different reasons, and those three are now the people that the people of Rochdale now have to choose from. I wish that the information that has come to light after this election and after nominations closed and after the ballot papers were printed, I wish that information had come to light sooner. Because if that information...
Has it been handled badly?
If that information had come to light, that individual would not have been the Labour candidate.
Has Sir Keir Starmer handled this badly?
Well, look, I think anyone that looks at the situation will see that it's been handled badly for the people of Rochdale.
Has he handled it badly?
I think the mistake that we made is not knowing that the secret recording existed, so we could have taken that meaningful action.
But the support was there up until it took. We heard about this was it Sunday, I think? The support was still there all day yesterday, but last night it changed. That's what I mean.
Well, there are significant figures, both in terms of the Jewish Labour movement and indeed key Jewish figures who have worked with Azar Ali in the past and had known him as someone who was an interfaith campaigner.
Nonetheless, the position has changed.
Absolutely.
Should Keir Starmer have done this sooner?
He has breached that trust. New information came to light, and once that new information came to light,
so what he said, first of all, wasn't bad enough.
It was right to withdraw the support. No, it was terrible. It was completely and utterly...
Keir Starmer still supported him.
It was completely and utterly unforgivable.
Moving on to another difference that you have with Keir Starmer, will you seek to reverse the Section 35 order on the Gender Reform Recognition Bill?
Well, actually, there's more consistency on the UK position than not. I have urged my colleagues across the UK to learn the lessons from Scotland and to look at this in a different way. The big failure, I think, happened as a collective in Scotland was that this bill was rushed through. There was little recognition of...
You whipped your MSPs to support it.
No, I'm coming to that. And I think on reflection, I've said this previously before, I think we were wrong to not be much harder with the SNP in saying that we want protections for single-sex spaces based on biological sex to be on the face of this bill. We want a recognition of the role of the Equality and Human Rights Commission to be in the substance of the bill. And we were wrong to take their argument that they had sought legal clarification and that these issues would be resolved after the legislation passed. That is clearly not happening.
So is Keir Starmer right in saying it's not the right way forward?
And the right way forward now is, rather than this being a simple constitutional fight between a UK government and a Scottish government, what should happen is we should ask the Equality and Human Rights Commission to look at where there are inconsistencies in this law, and both governments should commit to make those inconsistencies go away.
So for the time, the Section 35 order, for the time being, the Section 35 order of Labour getting into power will remain.
Well, we respect the verdict of the judge. Okay. And the judge has made it clear that the legislation as it currently stands has a negative interaction with the Equality Act. Finally, and I think the Equality Act should have primacy. Finally,
you're going to get lots, if the polls are correct, you're going to get a lot of former SNP supporters moving to you. Under what circumstances would a Labour government offer a second independence referendum that might be assuring to these people if they do come to Labour?
Well, a couple of things. One is, it's Nicola Sturgeon that previously said that they have to build a settled will for independence. Hamza Yousaf then in the leadership election and since has talked about building a settled will here in Scotland. There is no settled will. They've previously talked about a 60% support for independence.
So is that what you'd be looking for?
Look, I'm making a different appeal. And actually, if you look at what Nicola Sturgeon and Alex Salmond did in the run-up to 2007, they didn't somehow change their position on the Constitution. They recognised that the vast majority of people in the country didn't support the constitutional position, but they said directly to people, you may disagree with us on the ultimate constitutional destination, but let us, through good government and competence, try and persuade you. Now, they have failed in that regard, with every institution now being weaker after 17 years of an SNP government. So I am saying directly to people, I don't support independence, I don't support a referendum, but my goodness, do I recognise why you want to run a million miles away from this rotten Tory government. And
so a Labour government might allow a second independence referendum?
No, not at all. We have to demonstrate through good government that we can make the UK government work in the interests of people here in Scotland. And
how will you do that?
And I think people will want to give an incoming UK Labour government that chance to deliver that change. And then I actually think people will want change come to that election in 2026. But let me be really clear. We may ultimately disagree on the final destination for Scotland. But on this part of the journey, we all agree we need change. So let's work together, deliver that change, and allow us to demonstrate that we can have a government here across the UK and here in Scotland that can work in the interest of everybody across our country, and therefore demonstrate that politics can work rather than having to go down that route being suggested by the SNP.
Anas Sarwar, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you, John.